What if the system that controls your money wasn't designed to make you rich, but to keep you obedient? What if every loan, every paycheck, every economic boom was just a modern echo of a blueprint written thousands of years ago by rulers who understood one terrifying truth: that debt, not chains, is the most effective form of slavery. This is the hidden story of how ancient empires perfected the art of financial control, and how that same design has quietly evolved into the world we live in today. Because history doesn't repeat itself by accident, it's engineered to. Long before central banks, long before Wall Street, there was Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, and, quietly, the birthplace of debt. Around 3000 BCE, priests and kings began recording transactions on clay tablets. Grain, silver, and livestock were traded. But behind those simple records was something revolutionary: credit. You didn't need to have wealth. You could borrow it. But debt had a price. And when peasants couldn't repay, their land, families, or even their freedom were seized. The first debt slaves were born not from war, but from accounting. Over time, ancient rulers noticed something strange. When too many citizens became indebted, revolts followed. So kings began declaring debt jubilees, wiping slates clean to restore order, but not out of mercy. It was a survival mechanism. Debt was power, but too much power concentrated in too few hands destabilized the empire. That balance between control and collapse would become the eternal formula of financial rule. As civilizations expanded, Babylon, Persia, Rome, the blueprint evolved. The wealthy no longer needed to enslave individuals. They could enslave nations. Rome's expansion wasn't fueled by gold. It was funded by loans. Senators financed wars through private banks, and conquered lands were forced into tribute, paying back Rome in taxes and resources. The state's wealth came not from production, but from perpetual debt collection. When Julius Caesar tried to cancel debts to restore balance, the creditor class struck back. Literally. His assassination wasn't just political, it was economic. Fast forward 1,000 years. The Roman Empire falls, but the system doesn't. It mutates. The church, the nobility, and later the merchant banks of Venice inherit the blueprint. The Medici family, in particular, rewrote the code. By creating paper credit and early banks, they learned to make money without producing anything tangible, just promises backed by belief. It wasn't about gold anymore, it was about trust, and whoever controlled that trust controlled the world. By the 18th century, the blueprint reached industrial scale. The rise of central banking, starting with the Bank of England in 1694, marked the transition from royal debt to national debt. By the 18th century, the blueprint reached industrial scale. The rise of central banking, starting with the Bank of England in 1694, marked the transition from royal debt to national debt. The king could no longer pay for wars, so private financiers offered a deal. We'll fund your empire if you let us create your money. The catch? The debt never disappears. Every pound, every dollar, every franc was now born as debt, created by private entities, lent to governments, and repaid by citizens through taxes and inflation. And once governments were hooked, they couldn't stop. Wars, crises, infrastructure, all funded by borrowed money, owed to invisible creditors who never appeared on ballots. The Rothschilds, the Barings, the Warburgs, their names became synonymous with global finance, but few understood what they'd actually achieved. They had privatized sovereignty. Nations were no longer free, they were debtors. Even revolutions couldn't kill the system. When America won independence, it still inherited Europe's financial DNA. In 1913, the blueprint reached its modern form with the creation of the Federal Reserve, a privately controlled central bank that issues the US dollar as interest-bearing debt. A century later, every dollar in your wallet still represents a liability, not an asset, a promise to pay someone else at interest forever. Once the system took hold, it spread like a religion. The IMF, the World Bank, and countless financial institutions became its missionaries. Their gospel? Economic development. Their method? Loans. Poor countries were told to borrow in order to grow. But when repayment time came, their economies collapsed under the weight of interest. The blueprint scaled from individuals to entire continents. In 1982, Latin America's debt crisis exposed it. Nations defaulted en masse, and global bankers swooped in with restructuring deals, trading sovereignty for solvency. Governments sold state assets, cut social programs, and privatized industries. The result? Nations stayed permanently indebted, permanently dependent. The same mechanism appeared everywhere. In the U.S., credit cards, mortgages, and student loans replaced wages as the engine of consumer spending. The middle class wasn't rising, it was borrowing its lifestyle. Every crash, 1929, 2008, 2020, was a feature, not a bug. Each collapse transferred more assets upward, while pushing more people downward into invisible servitude. Every era has tried to break free. Gold standards were meant to restrain the printers, until governments broke their own rules. Cryptocurrency promised decentralization, but it's now being folded into the same system it rebelled against, through regulation and tokenized banking. Even universal basic income sounds compassionate, but it's another dependency mechanism, ensuring obedience in exchange for digital credits. Because the blueprint doesn't live in laws or currencies, it lives in psychology. It's built on trust, fear, and scarcity. The belief that money must always be owed, never owned. That value comes from someone else's permission. And as long as that idea rules our minds, the system remains unbreakable. Today, the architecture is digital. The debts are invisible, but their reach is absolute. Global debt now exceeds $315 trillion, more than 3 times the world's GDP. That means humanity owes 3 times more than it produces. But to whom? The answer is chilling. To the same kind of entities that existed in ancient Mesopotamia, creditors who create money by typing it into existence, then charge us for using it. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are the next phase. Programmable money with built-in expiration dates, spending controls, and tracking. Imagine your savings that vanish if not spent on approved items. It's not money anymore. It's permission. The ancient blueprint is complete. Not through armies or emperors, but through algorithms and compliance. First, debt was never meant to free you. It was designed to measure your obedience. Second, money is not value. It's control. Those who issue it define the limits of your freedom. Third, every crisis is an opportunity for consolidation. Each solution pulls power closer to the center. The blueprint that began on clay tablets now exists in code, and its creators don't need to rule nations when they already rule the numbers that nations depend on. So the question isn't if the system collapses, it's when. And when it does, the world will be offered a new solution, a global currency, born from crisis, promising safety, and delivering control. History has already written this story once. The only difference now is that we have the chance to read it before it repeats. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't let it end here. Share this video. Study the system. Question every solution that demands your compliance, because the first step to ending modern financial slavery is realizing you were never free in the first place.